In Islamic art, there is rarely a precise distinction between the religious and the secular. Prayers may be inscribed on vessels as banal as water pots, and illuminated Qurans may adapt their repertoire of jewelry and goldsmiths' work for their decorations. Nevertheless, there are distinctions, at least to a degree, between the decoration of Islamic religious foundations, palaces, official buildings, and the objects or materials used to furnish them. At first glance, one might assume the Bobrinsky bucket to be a common everyday metalware object, nothing more and nothing less. In fact, the Bobrinsky bucket is known for its elaborate decorative motifs, consisting of inscriptions written in Kufic script, animated Nasci. It also provides one of the earliest examples of Persian anthropomorphic calligraphy. The decoration also includes figural scenes such as people playing games, such as backgammon. The Bobrinsky bucket originates from the Middle East in a city known as Herat in northwest Afghanistan, nearby the Iranian border, dating back to the 12th or early 13th century, more precisely 1163 AD. The bucket was formerly in the collection of Count A. Bobrinsky, hence the name of the object. It's currently held in the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. The time period in which the bucket was created was in medieval Islam during the Seljuk dynasty. Materials used to create the bucket include brass and bronze, which was inlaid with silver and copper. The artist used the technique called lost wax casting process to create the bucket. It was then forged and decorated with the inlay. The dimensions are 18.5 centimeters, or a little over 7 inches in height. The well-known Bobrinsky bucket is remarkable for its exquisite decoration. Its round body is cast of brass and inlaid in copper and silver with horizontal bands of alternating Arabic inscriptions and figural scenes. Bronze items form the most important artistic production of the Islamic world. Even the surfaces of domestic ware were elaborately decorated with inlay. Fine copper, silver, or gold wires were inserted into narrow grooves, which created the designs. Calligraphic and plant motifs were used in ornamentation, which pictured animals, astrological signs, tableaux and banquets, and in the case of the Bobrinsky bucket, showed hunting and battle scenes. It took skill and delicate precision for artisans to create such pieces, and in turn many of these metalwares were seen as precious works of art. Some of the bronze objects, depending upon the extensive labor and exquisiteness, could be just as costly as the silver objects. Traditions of China and India had an influence on the bronze works coming from Iran and also Central Asia. So many of these objects contain an abundance of miniature illustrations that teach us details about the daily life of the medieval Muslims. They also illustrate generally held concepts about life on earth and in heaven, whereby everything is subservient to the will of Allah. 2 confronted dragons are the form for the cast handle. Their tails are being swallowed by other dragons whose bodies form a loop with a crouched lion at either end. The entire body of the bucket bears successive registers of decoration. Animated Nasci script is shown on the uppermost register. Its ascenders have human torsos, and some of its letters with terminations in the form of dragons' heads. The inscription is a type of well-wishing or prayer, and it is broken by circles which contain medallions of princes enthroned with a sunburst pattern surrounding the prince. The next register below the prince register is a scene of musicians and revelers partaking in courtly pursuits and activities such as backgammon, which is known as nard in the Middle East. Moving on to the central register of the bucket. It is filled with more expansive good wishes or prayers in platted Kufic script. These wishes and or prayers of good thought are largely repeated in the inscription at the base of the vessel. Between the central band and the base there is a band which contains horsemen who are hunting, hawking, fighting, and slaying dragons. The inlaid decoration, which is still well preserved, has finely chased detail, and the animated script is a first dated occurrence of this characteristic Herati decorative motif. The incorporation of scenes from daily life into the cycle of courtly images, which had evolved by the late 11th century as a means of illustrating the heroic life of the ruler, is also a very early occurrence. The Bobrinsky bucket was not made for a ruler, but rather a prominent merchant named Rukn al-Din or Rashid al-Din, who bore the titles Pillar of the State, Pride of the Merchants, and Ornament of the Hajj and of the 2 shrines, Mecca and Medina. The bucket was made by two individuals who had specialized jobs within the workshop, one being responsible for executing the other's design. It is unusual for an individual to have two titles in Al-Din. This alludes to the merchant's high status in the Islamic society, and it's possible that the second, Rashid al-Din, was Rukn al-Din's father. The dedicatory inscription, clearly written in Persian along the rim, states that the bucket was ordered by Abd al-Rahman ibn Abdallah al-Rashidi, who might have been an agent of Rashid al-Din. Inlaid by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahid and designed by Masud ibn Ahmad, the engraver from Herat. This dedicatory inscription shows that Persian was becoming increasingly accepted as a written language for everyday affairs. Arabic, and forever the language of Islam, was used for the good wishes. The anthropomorphic inscriptions are extremely difficult to read, but the text is so banal, glory and prosperity and power and tranquility and happiness to its owner, that any viewer could immediately guess its content. Important information that was meant to be read, such as the names of the donor, artisans, and recipient, and the date, was conveyed in more legible scripts. The division of labor is unusual, but it indicates that the workshops produced luxury metalwork and had craftsmen who specialized in creating such objects at this early date. Rukn al-Din, the merchant, and his title, Khwaja, was used in later Islamic cultures for the state merchants, who supplied rulers with strategic goods and materials. In particular, the state merchants supplied rulers with armaments, furs, and of course metalware. The merchants' titles relating to the pilgrimage and the date of the commission, the first month of the Muslim year, suggest that the bucket was intended as a New Year's gift after the merchant had performed the pilgrimage to Mecca. The bell handle, connected to the bucket by two loops, each formed by a fish and a leaping lion, is inscribed with the date of Muharram 559, corresponding to the date of December 1163. The question of what the Bobrinsky bucket's intended use for can be puzzling. It was once called a kettle or a cauldron, but these are misnomers. An inlaid object simply could not be used for cooking over a fire. Some scholars have hypothesized that the bucket was intended for carrying food or milk, but the copper interior would have needed to be tinned in order to avoid food poisoning from verdigris, or corroded copper. Buckets and pails might be used to draw water from wells, but the decoration on the Bobrinsky bucket would have been easily damaged, and drinking water from it could easily be tainted as well by verdigris. The most reasonable explanation for the bucket's use is that it was intended to hold water for washing. Ritual ablution, which had been proposed by some scholars because of the recipient's pilgrimage titles, seems unlikely because of the figural imagery, which would have been inappropriate for use in or near a mosque. Furthermore, theologians condemn the game of backgammon, a game of chance, and also as the devil's temptation, in contrast to chess, which just relied on skill. This proves that the bucket was unlikely to have been used in a religious setting. The Bobrinsky bucket was more than likely used when bathing in a hammam or bathhouse type of environment. One key fact to point out is that the representations of bathhouses from a later period in Herat show similar buckets used to pour water over the bather's body. The bucket's exquisite inlay meant that it was unlikely that the bucket would have been left inside the bathhouse. Its use as a container for water in the hammam was not only the function it served. It was used to impress the observer and to entertain the mind of the owner. The more images that could be packed into one single object, the more sustenance it could provide for the imagination. Although the form and function of the Bobrinsky bucket is quite simple, the act of thinking and wonderment and use of the imagination was perhaps the most important thing we should remember about the bucket. Not only did it impress the observer, it entertained the mind of the owner and provided sustenance for the imagination with its vivid figural imagery and positive affirmations.